Let the sky and God be our limit, and eternity our measurement. There is no height to which we cannot climb by using the active intelligence of our own minds. Mind creates, and as much as we desire in nature, we can have through the creation of our own minds. Marcus Garvey. Welcome to this week's Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism podcast. My name is Preston Floyd, and I am, as always, your host. So, I'd like to thank everyone for continuing to listen. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. I've gotten a little bit of feedback from it, and it's been mostly positive. In fact, no negative. I don't know why I said mostly. And this week, we're going to be going over the kind of religious beliefs of the Khoikhoi groups. Now, for those that are wondering, I was going to do a little bit more. However, we've had some very bad storms where I live today. In fact, I lost power for about 30 minutes while I was trying to record earlier. So this episode is actually probably going to be a little bit shorter because I only have a limited window before, I guess, the storms are going to come back through. So unfortunately, this week's episode is going to be a little bit shorter than I intended. But I'm hoping to get, at least a sizable chunk and get kind of this discussion out of the way. But regardless, I hope you enjoy this episode. So, and again, we're going to be going over the Khoikhoi religious groups. And I want to reiterate that these are a loose group of different peoples with some overlap in language and heritage. And they are not directly related to the San that we discussed last time. They're grouped together today because of geographic, social, and superficial linguistic similarity. They have their own distinct religious traditions, and I should also clarify what I said last week about outside influence on the religions of these groups. The San were isolated longer than the Khoikhoi, and thus had less interaction with other groups. And while the Khoikhoi were also isolated initially, they would encounter more groups earlier, and this affected all aspects of their development. So their original myths are tougher to get at than the Sans, but I'm going to try my best. And of course, all that said, I wasn't able to find a true universal creation myth for them. In fact, I would say they've had more divergence in their religious traditions overall. So I will have to settle for some of the more widespread stories and beliefs from these people. Like the San, they have separate creators. But unlike the San, they have a clear delineation between the two. Their chief deity is again named differently depending on the group, but the most common names for him are Nadiba, Iseba, or Gamab. And like Kang for the San, or Kagan for the San, depending on, of course, which group you're talking about, he's seen as creating the world that men live in and influencing all natural phenomena and spirits. That said, he seems a much more remote figure than Kang in a lot of the stories I've found about him. I didn't find many stories of him as a trickster hero, though I'm sure there are more, but this is just what I was able to find online. But that role is mostly filled by other figures. And of course, again, I do need to reiterate that the name of God among these groups is also a word for something that he oversees or provides. Nadiba is from the Naro word for sky. Gamab is the Damara word for a provider or source of water. Also, for the Naro word, sky, it is both used to refer to their god and the actual sky itself. Of course, you would refer to God in a much more, I guess, you might call it a formal way. And in fact, he is said to live in like the upper sky, like the sky above the sky. It's very much like a kind of a heaven allegory. And this may be something again that has been picked up from Muslim or Christian interaction in the area. It's hard to say, but he is different from Kagan in that he has more than one wife. He has both, I guess, a wife for the day and a wife for the night, and they are referred to as basically the feminine version of sky. And you would refer to the one in the day, and then when you talk about the one at night, you refer to them the same name. But they each give him a child. One is the sun, one is the moon, and a little bit of a difference from a lot of other religions that we'll get into later. This one has the sun as a female and the moon as a male, which is unusual. I think you'll find in most religions the moon's more feminine, the sun's more masculine. Not always the case, but this could be the oldest example of that. And basically these two interact with each other, and they, in the Khoikhoi myth, they are much less antagonistic towards each other than the San myth. Of course, in the San mythology, the sun chases the moon, kills him, and the moon revives itself. Whereas the sun and the moon in the Khoikhoi tradition, they are consorts, and every day they both kind of pursue one another, and then eventually they meet when they're both below the world where you can't see them, and then they create the next sun and the moon. So they're constantly mating and giving birth to themselves. At least that's kind of what I've seen. And, the moon, again, is an important figure. The sun is kind of seen as important, obviously, for, warmth and light. But she can get angry and make the world too warm. That's why this moon is preferred. And much like the sun, the moon is involved in a lot of rain and fertility rituals and just general, very good ritual practice, for good things to happen. The moon is very heavily involved. In fact, a lot of the early European accounts of the area, they specifically mention the Khoi and the San, but they mention both groups as being moon worshippers, which is not, obviously, that's very oversimplified and not strictly the case. But for Europeans just arriving to the area with very little ability to communicate with these people, or maybe even obviously any desire to communicate on a deep level, there's obviously misunderstandings from that. Now, another similarity, but also a difference that I should point out. Again, their version of God is very much the motivating force behind nature and the natural order, much like Kagan or Kang is. However, he's not so much channeling the power. He's more of a reflection or kind of a focus of it. He's kind of seen as both, he can kind of be overtaken by nature, and he will perform things that are both good and bad, in relation to humans. Obviously, in the natural sense, there is no good or bad. It is what it is. But when he's kind of, he may be cause of violence or, natural disaster. Basically, he's kind of channeling all these different forces in a much more primal way. It's not like a magical way, the way that Kagan does for the San. At least that's kind of the feel I get from reading these myths. And like, again, another similarity, but different for this, is he also has a kind of an enemy, as it were, like an antithesis to him. And that is, there's a couple of different names for him. It's Gagorib or Ganab. and he is kind of the personification or the spirit of death and kind of sickness and evil. And he kind of arises after the fact of creation, it seems like. At least he kind of shows up in these other myths. And a lot of the stories involving him kind of take part in a second era of creation. Again, this kind of division between the old world and the world of man. And for the Khoi, there are numerous hero gods or demigods that kind of come out of the conflict against Ganab. And there are some traditions that have these heroes as being aspects of God, as it were, kind of like Kagan, but also a little bit more. They seem in most cases to be separate entities. And again, that could be just how the stories have come down to us, or they initially may have been more related. It could have been more of an Adiba or Gamab. And I just realized Gamab and Ganab are very similar sounding. So if you can't quite get it, the evil god is Gaunab, or Gaunab, and Gamab is Gamab. Very similar sounding. And one of the aspects, so there is, he shares a very similar name to, depending on the group, to God, as it were. It's Hayitsi Ibib, or Kabib, depending on, again, the thing. And he's one of the mythical ancestor heroes. He's extremely famous. He was said to be the offspring of a cow that had some magical grass, and then he's the result of that cow eating the grass. And he's a great hunter and sorcerer and warrior. And he is he killed Gagarib, and he's kind of and he has many stories involving him. He dies and comes back to life numerous times, and he has a lot of burial sites all over Southern Africa. There are all these cairns that are said like, oh, this is where he died after he did such and such. And so he's very much a god of hunters, which is very important to a hunter-gatherer society. And even though as time goes on, these people do become more pastoralists, they still have that hunter tradition. So it's kind of hard to get a whole lot for him, or to get away from him, I should say. Another, and basically, I think one of those versions of the story I read is essentially that Gagarib has kind of set himself up over a kind of a bottomless pit, and he invites people to come and try to throw rocks and knock him in. And essentially, he's there to tempt them, but every time someone tries and does it, he fools them. They'll throw the rock, they'll hit him in the head, and the rock just bounces off his head, and it bounces back and kills them. It's very much like, oh, I'm going to try to, defeat death. But death always just, ends up getting them for obvious reasons. Then we have another version of that myth, and a different name, again, different group, and this is Suigoab. He is another supreme being, and he can also kind of be seen as like the I guess another version of God, but he's also kind of considered the kind of the founder of the Khoi people. And also, I should point out, Khoikhoi is a word for, it essentially means men of men, or people, or which can be translated as true people. So they're like basically related. This is kind of like a very much an in-group religion. But Suigoab, he's kind of his village is being struck by Gagarib, and Gagarib is gonna kill everyone and take them away to the afterlife. And Suigoab kind of stands up and says, no, if I challenge you to fight, and if I win, you have to, basically restore my people to health and all this, just kind of leave them alone, essentially. And Gagareb's like, okay, sure. And they fight, and Sugab somehow emerges victorious. And as he defeats Gagareb like strikes him in the leg or the knee, and this causes a wound. But and that's how that's essentially what the name means. It's like torn knee or something along those lines. And he wins, but Gagareb says, "Well, this." What you want me to do, I can't do. It's basically impossible for him to restore and give good health because he's the spirit of death and evil. He can't do all these good things. But because of the strike on his knee, kind of Sugab is able to transcend mortality, and he becomes a god of healing and health and all this good stuff and civilization, essentially. He becomes a great chief and leader among the various Khoi groups. I think also Utikso is another name he's known by. I think he kind of shows up in some other religions, so there might be common ground there, or it might be a borrowing or kind of a synchronization from those two groups, but that'll be for a future kind of story to get into. So essentially, again, there's less to go with the Khoikhoi stories. Well, there's not less to go with. There's plenty to go with. The question is, how much of this is original to them? How much have they practiced this? Or how long have they practiced this before they were influenced by outside groups? And it's really impossible to say, unfortunately. I think anything related to the hunting and the gathering is probably original to them. So I think Hitsi Ibib or Kabib, the hunter god, he is probably extremely old as their version of that initial sky god, with his wives and his celestial children, the moon and the sun. And so, what's the difference between the Khoi and the San religions? Well, the San religion, as it is very much related. There's not much of a distinction between humans and animals, at least as it comes to the creation myth. Kind of everything's related to everything else, kind of deal. Whereas the Khoikhoi, the religion is very much how are the gods related to each other, and how are people related to the gods. The San religion, God has essentially abandoned us. The Khoi do not hold that. God's still there. He's the sky itself. Even if it's above the night sky or the day sky, he's always there. Which is very, I think, a powerful belief, especially since you can look up and see it. The sky is always doing something. It's not like that there's a mystery. So I think that is a big distinction. Another distinction is that we talked about briefly what is a demiurge, kind of that trickster or kind of crafts figure that is not necessarily the creator of the world, but maybe a creator of the universe, but maybe just a creator of the world or order. We don't really have that with Nadiba or Gamib, whatever you want to call him. He's not a demiurge. He is very much just a strict creator or leader of order or nature, I should say. The natural order, not order with a capital O. Very, very primal still, but he, it seems like he is given the top billing. He is not just channeling nature. He is nature itself. So he's a bit more, I think, shall we say, primal, and kind of more omnipotent than, say, Kagan is for the San. Kagan can make mistakes, or he can be crossed by, his inferiors, whereas Nadiba he cannot be crossed. He is nature itself. He will do what he will do, good or bad for a human. It doesn't matter. That's the way things are. It will be done because he wants it done that way, or he has to do it that way because, again, that's just his nature. So even at the early stage of development, I can tell that there's definitely differences between these two groups. There's not like a common religious background, or if there is, it is extremely ancient and primordial, and I doubt we could ever kind of get anything from it. But yeah, so so I think the biggest, again, just to kind of summarize, just reiterate what I just said, San religion is very much everything's relation to everything else, whereas the Khoi relation is the gods' relations to each other and the relations to the Khoi people themselves. Other people don't seem to really enter into their equation, at least when it comes into their mythology or their worship of the gods or nature. So, that's kind of a heady couple of episodes. I wish I had more time this week, because I did want to kind of go ahead and introduce everything in our what will be our next episode. I at least wanted to get started on the groups, so just to kind of give you guys a preview for next week, we are going to be moving up from southern Africa to kind of the the central part of Africa, and the kind of the more middle east of Africa, for lack of a better term. And we'll be going over the different groups. We'll get to the Pygmies of Central Africa, and we will kind of try and guess what groups are in that eastern section of Africa south of the Horn. There's going to be a little bit of guesswork on that because, again, the people living there now are not the people that are living there 10,000 years ago. And I'll go in a little bit more detail. Obviously, that's a very big episode for Africa in the next 1,000 years or so. But again, everything in its time. I have decided I'm going to basically continue the historical episodes for the next couple of weeks. So the 8th through the 29th. And then I'm going to try and record a couple of more episodes for the 30th. That is Memorial Day here in the United States. It's a holiday for a lot of people. I do have that Monday off, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to record the Alpha movie and possibly also the 10,000 BC movie, and maybe put those out sometime during that week as kind of bonus episodes, or possibly just do maybe a 2-episode release on the 29th and 30th, and then that following weekend, that first weekend in June, and then do a kind of a back-to-back for the 5th and the 6th for a regular historical episode, and then another one of the movies. But that's my game plan right now, and I thank everyone for listening. You can reach me at my email for the podcast, which is waradrevpod@gmail.com. That's waradrevpod@gmail.com. And I will have the Twitter feed for the account linked in the description of the episode. And I hope to hear from you. And again, if you have any questions or comments, anything you feel like I should mention, or kind of want me to discuss or kind of circle back on, please do let me know. I am looking for feedback. I am very pleased with the numbers. It's a very small, group of listeners, but they do appear to be very regular. But anyway, again, thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.